components to this bill, and again in its abbreviated fashion. I would draw your attention to the bill where we redefine the revenue sharing component of this bill. The revenue sharing component in the transportation currently says you have a pot of about $50 million limited to about $1 million, or an amount up to $1 million. This would say that you could have an amount up to $250 million, and the limit would then be moved to $10 million. That was what we believe is necessary to meet the market conditions of today. Next, we would create the Passenger Rail and Operating Fund. This just simply creates the fund. It does not capitalize the fund, and this would be to contemplate when Amtrak will require the state to come up with its share, and we believe that in the future to be something around $30 million, but this creates the entity that would come from there. Next is the Infrastructure Bank. And what you find in the substitute that the gentleman from Prince William and I bring to you on the floor is an entity that would hopefully create additional investment, whether it's from localities or now with the amendment that the senator from Arlington placed in there, other transportation districts or transportation entities that we know today or that may be created that could come to the bank and leverage up other opportunities to perhaps accelerate certain projects. You will find also that the capitalization for this bank is only from the existing Transportation Trust Fund revenues. It's contemplated that would be about $250 million in the substitute that we bring to you. The last two components that I will explain in an abbreviated fashion is simply to accelerate previously authorized financing options that the General Assembly has entered into since 2007 and before. First, I want to draw your attention to what is called the GARBI, and that is simply to draw down federal revenue to accelerate specific projects. This would be a direct GARBI that would be for what is contemplated now for 3 projects, and those would be approved by the Federal Highway Administration, and it would have probably a 12-year schedule on the amortization. And we believe that we'll be able to break the backlog on those 3 projects. But in conjunction with the GARBI, Mr. President, members of the Senate, you also have the acceleration of previously authorized debt. And there you are getting into the illustrative list that many members have seen and examined of about 900 projects throughout the state. The reason as to why we would do it today is that we would take advantage of the historically low interest rates that are offered. We will pick up savings doing it today versus what we would do in the future by a significant amount. And what we find from the Department of Transportation is they believe that the bids that we are receiving today are on average 16.9% less, or to the taxpayer's favor, if you will, in the responsiveness of those bids. And the reason we have to do that today versus over a period of time is the Department of Transportation tells us if you were to break this out with reenactment clauses over a 4-year period, they would not be able to enter into a construction plan. The industry or the construction industry would not be able to ramp up, and we believe this is what is needed to try and put it forward in its best posture. So, Mr. President, last point I would make on all of the above is that from existing revenue sources, that being 1/3 of the insurance premium, we believe that even in the year 2017, there will be an additional $28.9 million of headroom cushion for debt service. By taking advantage of the lower rates today and the better bids that we think we're going to get, we still have a cushion of some $28.9 million. And for those of you that read the amortization schedule this weekend, if you go out to 2025 at the high water mark of when all of the debt would be added up from all of the projects, you still have $51 million of additional debt capacity, debt service capacity that could be afforded at that time. So, Mr. President, that's the bill as quickly as I can explain it, but as thoroughly as I can. I would be glad to answer any questions or any comments, and I'm glad to yield.
Mr. President,
for what purpose does the senator rise?
would the gentleman from Bristol yield for a series of questions?
Will the senator from Bristol yield for a series of questions?
Perhaps.
One at a time.
Mr.
Bath County, Senator
Mr. President, starting over on line 297, we're talking about the Garvey notes, which are popularly referred to as bonds. There's a legal distinction between notes and bonds, I guess. But how long will these notes endure?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, the answer to the gentleman's question is the amount would be up to the $1.2 billion, assuming they are all issued and assuming that you start on the same day of issuance, which probably will not happen. It would be in tranches. It's contemplated that this note would be over a 12-year period.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for an additional question?
I'm happy to yield.
Senator yields. Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
I assume these are paid for or serviced by anticipated federal revenue.
The gentleman's
Is that
correct.
Would the gentleman yield for an
I yield.
additional question?
Senator yields. Senator from
And
Bath
that-
County, Senator Deeds.
That revenue, as I understand it, will come from an as yet unauthorized, reauthorized federal highway bill.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I would respond that as we have every year, we wait for the authorization, and I would say that what is scheduled in this is anywhere from a high of $1 billion, $1.1 billion, $980 million, $970 million, and then at the fifth year, it's back above $1 billion as the schedule as we know it today.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd ask the gentleman if it's not true that this bill anticipates that federal revenue will increase.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I don't know that that's calculated into the model. What I have been briefed on by the Department of Transportation is that if we take the historical pattern of where federal revenues have been over the last 5 years and where they believe it will be going forward, it's contemplated that we will have only a 10% draw against what the federal anticipation is.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Well, Mr. President, isn't it true, I would ask the gentleman if it's not true that the last 2 years the Federal Transportation Trust Fund has only been made whole through transfers from the general fund at the federal level, and that unless they come up with a new way to fund the Federal Trust Fund, that fund is going to be broke. And that isn't it true that any sort of reliance on funding from that trust fund is somewhat foolhardy?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I think I'll choose to answer the question this way, that as I found the schedule, what we are anticipating in terms of issuance and starting in fiscal year 12 is $1,060 million, in fiscal year 13, $957.7 million, in 14, $975, in fiscal year 15, $993, in 2016 it would be $1,011 million, and in 2017 it's $1,030 million. So, Mr. President, my point is that is what VDOT's best guess of anticipation of the revenues would be. Again, I would point out to the gentleman that what is contemplated is roughly 10% of what we think that federal anticipation is. If the gentleman thinks that the federal government will short Virginia by $1 billion, I would say we have much bigger problems than the debate on Senate Bill 1446. But we're also going to be doing this in tranches, Mr. President, depending on those three projects as they go forward, when they're ready to go forward. So if we find that there is reduced revenue, we always have the ability to re-examine the issuance at that time.
Well,
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, in thinking about that federal revenue, I look at language on line 641 and 642, and then again over on 801, 802, that makes it clear that the notes can be serviced by other funds designated by the General Assembly, and I assume that that's in the bill on the off chance that the federal government does not come through with the dough.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Oh, I'm happy to yield. Mr. President, I would just say that once we issue and we go forward, the good news is we'll be constructing projects. And that's what this bill is about, and trying to do it in an accelerated fashion. If you think that the three projects that this portion of the bill is going to address, that being the Midtown Downtown Tunnel, the Route 460, the HOV hot lanes in Northern Virginia, you probably shouldn't vote for the bill. This is a way to accelerate those projects, and it is a financing tool. It is an obligation of the Commonwealth wherein we will move forward with the construction of those. And I think if you're uncomfortable with the federal government and the historical pick of where we've been, obviously that's a concern, but I think we ought to move forward with it.
Well,
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, what I'm trying to figure out from our friend from Bristol is, doesn't that language assume that general fund dollars could be plugged in the event that federal revenue is not available? I mean, isn't what that means? Other funds designated by the General Assembly, it doesn't limit it to transportation trust funds. It doesn't limit it at all.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
I'll yield. Mr. President, I would say that clearly if we have an issue where the federal revenue is reduced from the $1 billion average down further, we have a serious issue before us. And not to make light of a serious situation, we would likely find ourselves back in special session on transportation, whether Senate Bill 1446 passes or not. But I would say that it would be an obligation to continue with the construction there. I, for one, Mr. President, have made sure that the general funds have been protected for other priority sources. And I tell the gentleman that's the way I view our transportation funding as it's before us today, and that's my commitment to it.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I appreciate the gentleman's answer. I wonder if he'd yield for an additional question.
Senator, yield for an additional question.
Be happy to yield. Yes, sir.
Senator yield. Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I'd say to the gentleman, I'm thinking back to a presentation we had, I think, the end of deer season, rifle season, up in Stanton. The Senate Finance Committee was in retreat, and we were talking about debt financing. And isn't it true that by 2014, debt service for the Commonwealth will exceed 5% for the first time?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I'm not sure that's really within the bounds of 1446, but I would say the financial modeling that with the Debt Capacity Advisory Committee has contemplated all of the obligations that we have today with the revenue sources that we have available prior to this Friday. And I might add and refresh everyone that we had positive news this past Friday where the revenues have now rebounded, at least on the short term, to the positive of $152 million. The debt capacity improves when that happens, but the financial modeling that the Department of Transportation has with the max amount of issuance and with what we believe the 16.9% average better bid that comes back to VDOT, and with the at least 50 basis point favorable swing to us, if not 100 basis points, we still have the remaining in years 2025, some $51.3 million of cushion with the revenues as we knew them back in November. And that's the best answer, and I appreciate the gentleman giving me the shortcut to my deer hunting stand on that day when we were in Stanton.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for an additional question?
And Senator yield for an additional question.
I yield.
Senator yields.
That
Senator
day
from
we were
Bath County, Senator Deeds.
I apologize, Mr. President. We were handed a document, overview of state budget, implication for transportation. On page 8 of that document, there's something I'll quote. At present, there is no capacity for authorization and issuance of tax-supported debt for fiscal year 2011, 2012, and 2013. Now, we've heard about some change in modeling to allow for this additional debt. I wonder if the gentleman knows whether previous governors or General Assemblies have considered changing the debt model.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I would respond by saying the way I understand the debt capacity model, and if I speak in error, if someone wishes to correct me, please feel free to do so. But that model changes with the variables in the equation being the amount of debt that is outstanding, what is contemplated to be issued, how much of that outstanding debt remains, then how much you think you're moving forward with based on what you believe the market indicators and interest rates and the amortization schedule there too. So in this case, with the 12-year schedule and what we believe to be an interest rate of somewhere between 4 and 5% versus what was in the model the Senator references, which was 5 to 6%, we saved money by the lower interest rates. And I would point out to him, which is I think where the Senator's going, is that under the proposed model, I spoke in error, it is only 49.1 million of additional debt service capacity rather than the 51 that I spoke of. So we have the headroom, we have the ability. The higher education bonds and the transportation bonds have been contemplated and all are part of the Debt Advisory Committee's capacity.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for an additional question?
Will Senator yield for an additional question?
I yield.
That
Yield.
same document.
Senator, slow down. Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
That same document I referred to on page 20 says the annual debt service payment for all Transportation Trust Fund supported debt is $255.5 million, and that amount is 52% of available Transportation Trust Funds. Further, it says that amount will not drop below 40% of available Transportation Trust Funds before 2020, and that's assuming there's no additional Transportation Trust Fund secured debt authorizations. My question is, what will total debt service look like at the peak under this bill, what in terms of percentage and also in terms of raw numbers?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I would say I have been advised that if we go over 5%, it would be in 1 year, and that's a very small 5.1%. And that was with the question of when does the Fran retire and when does the Garvey go forward. But on average, it is, I would say to this body that it's right, if it's not at 5%, it's just a touch over. But what is more important in my mind, the model that the senator references does not include what the governor had proposed within Senate Bill 1446 and the schedule that is very clear that I have, that we shared with the Finance Committee. Finance Committee staff studied it. Members on this committee studied it. Mr. Chairman studied it. We believe that at the highest water mark, we still have the ability to service an additional $49 million of debt. I don't know how else to say it, Mr. President, but I think the capacity is there, and we have a $50 million cushion to the upside of it, assuming the economic conditions as we know them today.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, will the gentleman yield for an additional question?
Will the senator yield for an additional question?
I yield.
Senator yields. Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I'd say that the gentleman, I'm just about finished. I looked at a document last week that was dated January 14th, 2011. It's styled Illustrative VDOT and DRPT project list. Does that list come from the 6-year plan, from engineered projects that are in the 6-year plan around the Commonwealth?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, now we're into matters that are not contained within Senate Bill 1446, but it is a legitimate question, and I'll try to answer it to the best that I can. The list that many have heard about and that have been discussed are some 900 projects that the Department of Transportation brought forward, believing that they were ready to go, that being most of the right-of-way and or engineering had been completed, and that they believe within the issuance of, remembering we start in fiscal year 11 all the way through fiscal year 16 in this authorization, they believe that those projects would move consistent with that schedule.
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
What I'd ask, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask if the gentleman would yield for an additional question.
Will the senator yield for an additional? Senator yields. Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
So I guess at this point, this is an illustrative list, but we don't know for certain which projects will be funded or which ones we'll go forward with between now and 2016.
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I would respond by reminding the body that there are two different types of financing tools. The GARVES are direct GARVES, which are specific projects. There I have greater comfort looking the senator in the eye and saying, I believe with a degree of certainty that those three projects, the HOV Hot Lanes, the Downtown Midtown Tunnel, and the 460 connector, will move forward. I believe that very firmly. The remaining projects we've learned from previous attempts at trying to craft transportation bills, the specificity of projects is something that, for whatever set of reasons, may not move forward. It can be that the EIS does not align accordingly. One of the options within the EIS is a no-build option, and there have been times when no build, for whatever set of reasons, was the option. So the point was we will have some $3 billion of acceleration of bonds, but that's why that list of 900, I think, is just a bit fluid.
Well,
Senator from Bath County, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I thank the gentleman, but I'd like to ask one more question, if I may.
Will the senator yield for one more question?
I'd be happy to, yes.
Senator yields for one more question.
You know, a whole
Senator
bunch
from
of
Bath
people.
County, Senator Deeds.
I apologize. A whole bunch of people have looked at that list and they've gotten kind of excited thinking that projects in their area are going to be built. And I know that some will make the cut and some won't, but what plans after 2016 are covered by this far-reaching transportation bill?
Senator from Bristol, Senator Wampler.
Mr. President, I will try to answer the question this way again. I think the senator's question goes beyond what is in Senate Bill 1446. All I know is what I'm asking the body to do is adopt the financing tools to move forward a series of projects. And I cannot tell you at the end of the day whether it will be 850, 900, or 950 projects. So I would say we still have an overhang of some $20 billion from whether it's the 2000 Act or the 2007 Act. So, Mr. President, I would hope that we could get as many projects as we can, but I do want to look every member in the eye and say, with certainty, I cannot tell you if that illustrative list of 900 projects is what actually happens, but I hope we can move through those and perhaps some more.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr.
Senator from
President,
Bath County, Senator Deeds.
I thank the gentleman.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman resume the floor for a question, please?
Will the senator yield for an additional question?
I'll yield, Mr. President.